let me allow Firas to take over from here. Firas, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Ali, and thank you to CIO for the invitation, and to Laura. First of all, I just want to say I think it's actually a very, very exciting time to be in fintech in Africa, particularly in East Africa. I was born in the US, and I remember going to university in the late 90s when the whole internet boom happened. And my analogy of Africa right now is the 1999 of the internet back then, where there was no Google at that time, there was no Facebook, there was none of these companies that are dominating the space right now. And I think those companies still potentially have time to come up. So I think there's a tremendous amount of innovation that could potentially happen in this region. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of that innovation finds its way back to places like Europe and America eventually, once it's all said and done. So I had a set of slides. Let me see if those are going to show up. Yeah, okay, here we go. So basically, to give a little bit of background on what we're doing, we have a company called Azam Pay. We're part of the Azam Group. Azam Group is one of the larger FMCG conglomerates in the region. So what we're doing with Azam Pay is taking that footprint that has been built through the branding of fast-moving consumer goods that is very dominant, of course, in Tanzania, but also in other parts of East Africa, and see if we can build a digital commerce ecosystem from that footprint, leveraging that footprint. So a lot of what Muni was saying about ecosystems, building kind of transaction platforms, building products as platforms is really where we are headed. And kind of referencing what Kamau said about data, I think it's also one of the key factors that we're trying to implement is around building ecosystems around data-driven decision-making. With respect to COVID, I would say the following. I think when you talk about is COVID driving digitalization, I think you need to think about it. It's a very complex question because there's a lot of different verticals in which fintech addresses. So are we talking about payments? Are we talking about e-commerce? Are we talking about B2C commerce? Are we talking about B2B commerce? I think it depends. Basically, is COVID driving? Also, it depends on the country. So a place like Tanzania, where we're most active right now, there is no lockdown. So it's less an issue with respect to driving digital payments. Also, of course, in a place like Kenya, you have the central bank work with M-Pesa to reduce the cost of the digital payments for certain transactions. So that has also led to uptake, which didn't happen in Tanzania. So I think it's a mixed bag in my sense. But what I wanted to do was talk about a little bit about how we are going about building an e-commerce platform and logistics platform around digital commerce and building that through an ecosystem. So if you look at e-commerce, if you look at digital payments, this graph is from Geopol that I'm putting up on the screen here. And if you look at the highlighted sections where I've highlighted in yellow, those are transactions that are predominantly done in mobile payments or digital payments. So if you look across, all the countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, even over to Nigeria, the vast majority of transactions continue to be in cash, despite the fact that digital has been present now in East Africa and parts of Africa for more than 10 years. So what we've seen, and if you look at top cash payment categories, it's basically all the transactions that are face-to-face, right? Anything that you're transacting in person with someone ends up being typically in cash. And then if you look at what do people actually use digital payments for? It's for those transactions that don't happen in person. So for example, airtime or pay TV or internet, it's actually more inconvenient for you to go to pay those transactions at the office than it is to pay them on the phone. As compared to the other transactions were predominantly cash, where beverages, transportation, groceries, these are all typically transactions people make at the point of sale. Now, in the context of COVID, in a place like Tanzania, still most of these transactions are taking place in person. So you might find certain pockets where there are wealthier residents that are now trying to push for e-commerce to deliver their groceries to the door. but I still think most people are still transacting in cash. So what are the barriers to e-commerce in a place like Africa? So we've identified 4 of them, and one of so the first one being smartphone penetration. Now, is smartphone penetration increasing? Yes, it is increasing. Certainly, more people are buying smartphones. In a place like Tanzania, I think it's around 28 to 30% smartphone penetration. At the same time, if you look at smartphone utilization, as in people downloading applications and using them as applications, it's actually much less. So a lot of people buy a smartphone simply to use WhatsApp. They're going to avoid the messaging charges. They're going to avoid some of the other charges associated with phone calls, but they're not necessarily using it as an application. And so what we've seen is when we've been building our e-commerce platform and trying to get retail shops to purchase through e-commerce, we've seen customers being, even with smartphones, being unfamiliar how to use the smartphone. So I think that's one issue. Total addressable market, meaning that particularly if you look at B2C commerce in Africa, if you're trying to sell products to consumers through a smartphone, I think the market still needs a little bit more maturation. Is there enough of a consumer demand for of people who have smartphones who can order that will build a big enough economies of scale to justify the cost of that whole infrastructure you need to build to deliver e-commerce? Last mile delivery, logistics, these are still issues that need to be addressed. There's no postal service in many of these countries that deliver products in the way that needs to happen for e-commerce to work properly. So any company that goes into the e-commerce business then needs to build that logistics. And if you try to rely too much on third parties, then you end up hold on, my slides got removed here. You end up running into problems. Let me go back. And then trust. So the question is trust. A lot of people have been burned on issues of e-commerce in Africa. So they have struggled. They've had a bad experience. What they ordered online is not what showed up. And we know, everybody knows about Jumia. They've struggled. And I think part of the reason they've struggled is because of these barriers that have not, it's even more difficult. So if you look at what Jeff Bezos did with Amazon in a place like the United States, he actually had none of these issues to deal with. Smartphones were not an issue. Everyone had a computer. Total addressable market was not an issue because the American market is enormous. Last mile delivery logistics was not an issue because the postal service delivered relatively accurately to every address in America. In fact, not only to every city address, but they're required by law to deliver to every rural address. So really what Jeff Bezos had to worry about was trust. How do I get people to trust me to put their credit card in online and purchase something? And that's a much simpler problem to overcome, particularly in the B2C space, than what you're dealing with in a place like Africa. So what we are focusing on is actually B2B commerce, because we think that's where some of these issues can be addressed right now, as opposed to waiting for the market to mature a little bit more. So from a smartphone penetration perspective, retail shop owners that are purchasing their supplies through us, they're seeing their smartphone as a business tool. They can save money. If we have the right price, the smartphone pays for itself. The addressable market is not an issue, because if you're talking about FMCG distribution, then that turns into a daily transaction, a daily or even sometimes twice daily transaction. So you're getting processing enough product to justify your costs of infrastructure. You of course have to solve logistics, is what we're focusing on as well. And you have to build trust, and trust is really one of the critical factors in making the whole ecosystem start to gel. So what can we offer a retail shop owner through our kind of digital e-commerce platform that they wouldn't otherwise get through a regular distributor? Transparency in pricing, delivery tracking, reliability of supply, ability to use data to track what they're doing and provide them other services or products. We provide lending, supplier lending. So all these things that what Kamal was discussing with respect to data, we can build that data into the product and offer them the things that they need when they need them. So that gives us a little bit of an advantage. And ultimately, what it's going to take is us to be 10 times better product than the local distributor for the customer to really switch over. You can't be the same value proposition. You have to be better and significantly better, because behavior change is not an easy thing to do. So facilitating trust, I think this is really, when it comes down to it, one of the critical things that needs to happen. One of the issues I've seen with mobile wallets in Tanzania and other parts of East Africa is the focus is on transactions, on moving money, whereas I think the next step right now for the industry is for payments, or the process of moving payments, really to be focused on facilitating trust, not necessarily just moving money. And when I say facilitating trust, I mean, how does a payments platform create a trust among the customer that it's going to make sure that the product that they order is what shows up, right? So that is what happened in the United States with credit cards. Credit cards were willing to take the risk that product was fraudulent or did not show up in your house, and you could go call the credit card company and they would go work it out with the vendor. The mobile payments infrastructure doesn't do that right now in East Africa, so that's one of the core factors I think that needs to evolve in order for digital commerce to take place. So the ecosystem approach, you need the logistics in place, you need the critical mass for consumer demand, and you need the trust facilitation mechanism. Those three things together, I think, will build the build the ecosystem that needs to gel to make everything work. The other point I would make is there's no one size fits all. What I'm doing in Tanzania may not be what makes sense in Rwanda, may not be what makes sense in Kenya. Each market is actually very unique. In fact, parts of cities in Dar es Salaam that we're operating in are different than other parts of the city. So I think a blanket approach, particularly in Africa, is not a useful one. And in terms of COVID advancing the system, my final thoughts on that are, I think Africa is moving digital regardless of whether there is COVID or not. I think in certain areas, COVID is advancing because there's a push and a pull on both sides that COVID is creating. It's making cash somewhat toxic for certain parts of the population. In other ways, I don't think it's making that much of a difference, particularly in a place like Tanzania, where there hasn't been much of a change, at least in the commercial function of the economy based on COVID. So it's a mixed bag, but regardless, I think it's just another factor that is really part of a more inexorable change that's happening, which is everything is eventually going to go digital. I think the question is, how do we build the infrastructure and the groundwork to facilitate that process? I would make one point on what Stephen Morrow was saying on issues of cash. I actually previously worked.
You need to wrap it up now.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap this up. I previously worked in a place in Bangladesh on another company, and in Bangladesh there was for many years arsenic poisoning, which is where you drink water and it poisons you over about 10 years. And the remedy for that is widely available, but people didn't use it because it kills you over 10 years. So human beings tend to not change their behavior unless there's something really immediate that's affecting them. So is COVID going to prevent people from using cash? I don't know. I think still a lot of people will.
We had lost you there for a minute. Are you
no
back?
worries. Yeah, I'm back, but you guys can proceed. I think I got through most of it.
Oh, all right. Thanks, Firas, for that. But please hang in there. We'll come back with a few questions to you.